flux and cuts. Judge Schreber 5 has divine rays in his ass. Solar anus. And rest assured it works. Judge Schreber feels something, produced of something, and theorized about it. Something is being deduced effects of machines, not metaphors. Of the schizophrenic, it's a better model than the neurotic lying on the couch. A bit of fresh air relationship with the outside. Take the stroll of Lenz into the outdoors. It is different from moments when Lenz finds himself with his good pastor, who forces him to situate himself socially in relation to God, in relation to Father, in relation to Mother. On the contrary, he is in the mountains under the snow with other gods or without God at all, without family, without father or mother, with nature. What does my Father want? Can he give me better? Impossible! Leave me alone. Everything is a machine. And three celestial machines, the stars are rainbows, alpine machines, each coupled with those of his body, noise machine. Uninterrupted, idle instrumental. It must feeling of endless bliss to be in contact with the profound, life profound to every form. To have a soul for the rocks, metals, water, and plants, to welcome into oneself, as in a dream, every element of nature, like flowers that breathe with the waxing and waning of the moon. Och det landskap gissar where både där vi vill det ner, inom the replies. Krongas can be a chlorophyllin machine or a photosynthesis machine, or at least slip his body as a part into such machines. Lenz put himself before the distinction of man nature, before all the identifications that this distinction conditions. He could not experience nature as nature, but as a process of production. There is no more man or nature, only process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together. Producing machine, desiring machine everywhere, schizophrenic machines, all generic life. Me and not me, exterior and interior don't mean anything anymore. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. The desiring machines, machines.
The sun was shining on the sea, or shining with all his might. He did his very best to make us see the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was odd, the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily, because she thought the sun.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. We are on our fourth way through, and we are no longer, we've transcended reading Anti-Oedipus, and we're now reading another version of it, our own version of Anti-Oedipus translated in our words. And with you all yelling at me constantly, which is always good. Man, this has been a lot. Let's see. Last week was a compressed reading, so I'm going to try to re-summarize last week, and then we'll be moving forward. I think we're going to get through a couple paragraphs today. They're a little shorter, a little easier, not quite as insanely dense. So chapter 1 of Anti-Oedipus is focused on the machines of desire themselves, constructing this ontology of how the unconscious functions as factory specifically, rather than theater, the traditional psychoanalytic view. If you ever listen to Zizek talk, for example, he talks about ultimately the theater, the performance of various symbolic elements in our unconscious, how they interact, how they play against each other. They're throwing this out. They're saying, no, this actually is production. Production, as Marx showed, operates in very particular ways. He just didn't take it far enough, which is kind of Deleuze's entire thing, is taking it further and further. Josh, is just so you know you're coming through. Just so you know. So you're good. You just mute up. They organize these elements and this production around a handful of syntheses that they basically are more or less taking from Kant and his syntheses, which is what Deleuze does kind of a lot. The way production operates here is it starts with the connective syntheses of production, where partial objects connect and interrupt and reconnect. Every desiring machine is coupled to something and couples to something else. It's a constant process of creation and connection and creation. As this happens, inscription occurs, the BWO forms, and then the conjunctive happens, the so-its, where you say, oh, that's just my tea. Oh, that's just my smelling my own farts, all of that stuff. The ego sort of creation falling back over everything. The last paragraph, I say all this because the last paragraph is very much a hinge of the chapter. I said this last week and I'll say it again. It's important to consider it. This is where we start making a move. Everything before it ultimately is kind of a blueprint and preparation for the claims that are going to be coming through the rest of the chapter that are then going to be sort of dissected, critiqued, and auto-critiqued in the rest of the book. And also A Thousand Plateaus, and also really the rest of all of their works, as I read it at least. To just sort of revisit the previous paragraph, which is a lot, as you can see. If social repression disarms the obvious objective, if social repression bears down so massively on desire, doesn't this mean that desire is a separate psychic reality, that our libido, that the internal process, that the imaginary, the symbolic, is a separate reality as opposed to simply more material construction? the way that psychoanalysis has traditionally treated it, the answer here is, well, yeah, of course. It's a social repression bears down on desire. Therefore, they are two different materials. They're two different things that interplay with each other, but they are two different things. This is traditional psychoanalysis. And again, Marx would go, it's not that the rich bear down on the poor. That's not really how capitalism works. That's how the simpler version of it works. Instead, it's here are these interlocking systems that are all part of the same ontological system, the same reality underneath itself. And so they take that same thing, disarming the dualism and removing it. Repression changes nothing for them at all. There is no second interior realm for desire to inhabit because it is all the same. As they open the last paragraph, and it's going to be important from here, there is not, on the one hand, a social production of reality, and on the other hand, a desiring production of fantasy. I heard someone unmute. Someone have a comment?
Could you elaborate on the repression part, right? In terms of social production and desire and production.
Yeah. So we'll be getting to how it works for them, but they're specifically drawing out this particular critique because it is central to it. Traditional Lacanian psychoanalysis or Freudian psychoanalysis basically talks about how the social world and the psychic world are two different ontic realities. So we have the social world happens, the interior world happens. Things in the interior world become expressed into the other, but they are not the same basic level. They're not the same thing, more or less, right? There is an interior realm for Lacan. There is the psychic realm of the imaginary, the psychic realm of the symbolic, and the way that these things interact with the real. This makes effectively the interior experience of a person. They're saying no, that there's no dualism here. It's all the same thing. And they do this because
only the real, right?
The real is what desire imminently produces. Basically always. That social production and desiring production are more or less, they're not more or less. These are the same thing, but one is the other under determinate conditions, which we will be explaining over the next 2 or 3 paragraphs, which I think is why I'm standing slightly away from going super deep, because I don't want to just reread the previous paragraph. But the things this does, there's a handful of steps. So first off, obviously, we get rid of the dualism. And they make a phenomenal argument to do that, which again, we're going to be revisiting. So I'm not going to be going a ton over it, but we're going to be revisiting a ton of that stuff. The second thing it does is it strips fantasy of its autonomous status. It's a big thing they go over in this last paragraph, and we tend to talk about it, colloquially as though you have fantasies and they're in your head and they're like this thing that like sets you up and they're almost primary, but they play inside. They're like, no. Fantasy itself is actually secondary and it's actually derivative of things. The private fantasies of any individual are actually group fantasies, always, because there are expressions of identities that are pre-given to desiring production. We'll be getting to it, don't worry. The third thing that they do in this last paragraph before we move forward, and it's kind of going to be really important, is it splits how fantasies operate kind of along 2 poles, depending on how you read the identity of the thing. If we're talking, for example, about how libido invests the social field, in its most repressive form, how the libido is working that way. Or we can also talk about, it's not doing it repressively, that it's counter-investing revolutionarily, that desire and how it invests socially, depending on how you read the identity of things, functions differently, right? They use the example of utopianism that came from like the 1800s, right? The socialists of old who talked of this utopian vision.
You mentioned that in the previous episode, right? Where you said that these utopians have elaborate systems, right? But what's the point of mentioning the utopians? I forgot the point of it in Deleuze.
Well, so the mention in this previous paragraph specifically is that they're taught they how I read it, it is not, as they're putting forward, we're not meant to really read the ideal space and ideal models into what they're doing. That utopians are not actually idealists in that sense, that like, oh, here's the ideal model of a thing. What they are is actually agents of actual productivity of desire. But what they're doing is they're deinstituting the present field. That's how they're investing. They're investing not by sort of removing the present field and having productive desire be utilized that way. This is, again, once you've done the thing where you've said, oh, all of it is actually the same, you start having to see, oh, well, for example, if people, oh, you're a utopian, it's not that you have in your head this fantasy idea of how this perfect world should work. That's not what utopianism is. What you've done is you're actually investing in the social field, but you're doing so in a way that has deprivileged the present. It is a change in how the meaning comes about. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Risking the present, risking the present. And one of the head figures of this movement of utopia, read about him, is Charles Fourier, right? One of the movement, and he did a lot of books. One of my favorite book is I think it's the hierarchy of. I don't wanna, because the name is CUTK, right?
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting that Deleuze kind of like point out that these, like, even Marx said in one of his writings that Charles Fourier, which one of the leading figure of the utopian socialists, he said that he's a bud dialectician, right? He's a bud dialectician. That's what Marx said about Charles Fourier.
Interesting. I'm not
Before we
familiar.
start, I
I'll look it
actually
up.
did have a question.
Please.
So, when we're talking about criticizing this dualism between the psychic and social realm, did Deleuze ever engage with the sort of like Kohut and like the personal psychology or ego psychology of the psychoanalytic tradition?
Well, I mean, they're kind of. I'm uncertain how they haven't yet. Do you want to be more specific for me?
So, I mean, I specifically, did they talk about the idea? Because I mean, I haven't read a lot of Kohut, but I did hear that there were certain psychoanalytic ways of thinking that did emphasize the material relations between individuals in forming identity.
So, the easiest way is actually to just sort of. That's a big question. I'll have to think about a way to sort of angle where they mention this, because they've mentioned it already. We're going to be getting to it in chapter 2. They go very heavily into how ego identity is formed and how it's part of a paralogistic system. Again, using Kant's terms for the syntheses. Syntheses are, for Kant, not necessarily like I think X, therefore Y, which is like a rational in-time process, but instead sort of an immanent synthesis of ideas and logical propositions that can be done incorrectly. And when they're done incorrectly, they're paralogistic, and the ego formation is part of that. Because one of the things, and it's they don't deal with it in like a super deep critique, because they've kind of here at this point already tossed, like this last paragraph kind of tossed it away. The thing, anytime you do the material world affects the ego, that becomes so wait, then is the ego its own material? So then it has a different nature than the rest of things. This becomes and starts becoming the larger sort of critique they're layering. In this paragraph, the previous paragraph, the one from last week, their big point, and it's kind of, I think, the one that ends up carrying through a lot of this, the simplest and the strongest. When you talk about desiring machines and technical social machines, which is anything that you're talking about, a determinate configuration, which would be an ego, it would be this reading, it would be you being late to work, whatever, all of these things. There is no actual difference in nature. It's purely difference in regime due to relations of magnitude and the differential relation of magnitude, effectively. So desiring production at large has an organization that seems to be the ego, but it is not an ego. There's no difference in kind. It's all the same nature, more or less.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious because when we talk about psychoanalysis, one of the problems is that it's a very broad subject because there are many things that can come under it. So it's hard to have a perspective on anything regarding psychoanalysis, and unless you get more specific about which thinker or concept you're referring to.
Yeah, well, they actually, and it's in chapter 2, their critiques of psychoanalysis come with, and they do it, granted, in their French way. I think it comes more clearly in this translation when we get to it. There's a lot of psychoanalytic thinkers that they really like, and they don't dislike Lacan. It's not that kind of thing. It's they have critiques of a lot of what he did, but they're like, he's doing the right thing. This is the right direction. So there are people that I think maybe this book is the last place they're ever cited because they're so obscure in the tradition of like psychoanalytic Freudian who inspired Lacan in this one way, and they found him and they pull him out and then they read him a little bit. That kind of stuff they use a great deal to sort of build out, because Lacan was in a very, I would say, strong direction heading towards trying to get towards a hyper-materialism or a real materialism of psychoanalytic thought, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's it. So unless someone else has a question, I would like to start with the reading.
All right. It's a shorter one. Thank God, huh? It's a shorter one. There's going to be a lot happening inside of this one. There's going to be a lot happening. Jesus. This is going to be a thing. Okay. 2 seconds. I want to make sure. Is YouTube working? YouTube. I'm not getting messages through that. Is my system broken? Video ID. Is it the wrong video? Sorry, I'm just, this is what happens when I fucking do this stupid shit in. Oh yeah, no, so that's not going to work today. That's wonderful. That's frustrating. So be it. What can I say? Fuck. All right, fuck it. Off we go. Next paragraph. Last week was intense. It was very intense. YouTube seems to be working. That's fine. Thank you for the star. I don't know what that does, but thank you. Goth Brooks? No, just black t-shirt Brooks. I have a black. It's a very nice, one of my favorite t-shirts. Like really nice, thick material. All right, YouTube's working clearly. All right, off we go. Let's do this fucking thing. You guys can see, everyone can see. Off we go. The massive existence of social repression bearing on desiring production affects in no way our principle. Desire produces the real, or desiring production is nothing other than social production. It is not a question of reserving for desire a particular form of existence, a mental or psychic reality that would oppose itself to the material reality of social production. Machines of desire are not phantasmatic or oniric machines, which would distinguish themselves from technical and social machines, and would come to double them. Phantasms are rather secondary expressions, which derive from the identity of the two sorts of machines in a given milieu. Thus, the phantasm is never individual. It is a group phantasm, as institutional analysis has known how to show. And if there are two sorts of group phantasms, it is because identity can be read in two senses, according to whether machines of desire are grasped in the great gregarious masses that they form, or according to whether social machines are referred back to the elementary forces of desire that form them. It can thus happen in group phantasm that libido invest the existing social field, including in its most repressive forms, or conversely, that it proceed to a counter-investment that connects to the existing social field, the revolutionary desire, for example, the great socialist utopias of 19th century function, not as ideal models, but as group phantasms. That is to say, the agents of real productivity of desire that make possible a disinvestment or a deinstitution of the present social field to the profit of a revolutionary institution of desire itself. But between the two, between machines of desire and technical social machines, there is never a difference in nature. There is certainly a distinction, but only a distinction of regime, according to relations of magnitude. They are the same machines, with the difference of regime alone, and it is this that group phantasms show. Group phantasms. Yeah. A lot of this, if you can't tell, I did pre-read, and a lot of it made into, it's because this is a previous paragraph. They're just pulling stuff out of it now. And being very, 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 very specific. The sentence about deinstitution is very clear. There's so much about, when they do their big paragraphs, I find a lot of it is dense and complicated. But luckily, the writing style Deleuze has, and he's got this in like all of his books, is he makes like crazy specific philosophical, like traditionally what we would even call like analytical, logical statements. But they're so fucking dense that and interwoven. And then he spends a few paragraphs going like this, like this, like this, like this. And it's like, oh, shit. Okay. So let's do it. We start with the massive existence of social repression, bearing on desire and production in no way affects our principle. Desire produces the real, or desiring production is nothing other than social production. I kind of explained this, but this is, it's worth literally hammering home because all the misreadings, you will hear people say things like, well, that's just desiring production. No, that's there's a weird thing when people come away from the book and they go, oh, I've figured out what happens underneath things, underneath it all. It's like, nope, no, there's no underneath it all. That's not really how it works and how it functions. It is desiring production. Social production is the same thing. Desire produces that which is experienced, the real, directly. And it is always social production. It is not a question of reserving for desire a former existence, a mental or psychic reality that would oppose itself to the material reality of social production, which is the question of traditional psychoanalytic thought. I mean, I would argue it's generally speaking, it's also how CogSci and a whole bunch of things currently work as they're trying to figure out how to explain the absurdity that is the space of fantasy. They tend to go, oh, no, we're actually outside of this, or the fantasies you have, they exist outside of the material reality. Instead, maybe it is it being expressed every single moment. So as you're considering the material reality, it's also desiring machines expressing themselves as social machines as you're understanding it. Always, 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 always actualizing in all of those moments fucking constantly. Because this is like this is one of those things like the original translation, right? Hurley says, I have here, it is not a question of reserving. Hurley's version, and I find it very frustrating. It is not possible to attribute a special form of existence to desire, a mental or psychic reality that is presumably different from the material reality of social production. I don't even know what the fuck that means. It is not a question of reserving for desire a form of existence. That's literally, it's not even a question of the translation. But Hurley's phrasing leads to that sort of odd misunderstanding that I think pervades a great deal of how people come away from this book. There is no dualism whatsoever between your psychic register, even right now, as you're listening to this, your psychic register as a thing, right? It's not like separate from or laying over in any way the material reality of things. It is the material reality of things. It is a full refusal of the idea of material versus psychic. It's a contrast to basically everything that comes from psychoanalysis at this point. Again, a lot of Lacan was trying to square this circle, which I think is why they are so good with him later on. But they say, and they continue, machines of desire are not phantasmatic or oneric machines, which would distinguish themselves from technical and social machines and would come to double them. Desiring machines, oh, those are desiring machines. Oh, those are social machines. Oh, it's just a social machine. No. It's not any of those things. Doubling the ontology of things, having two versions of everything. Oh, you see the traditional psychoanalytic view. You see a cigar, but really how that works for people is it works psychically as a fucking phallic symbol. That's it. Oh, you just see people working, but they're living out their daddy issues. Whatever. That's kind of how we constantly talk about this way that people see the psychic space versus the real world. You can't have both. Like you have both of them. You have your drives, you have your frustrations. Oh, there's an internal battle going on that's completely separate from the external. It's finding its way out. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening here. And again, this is really different from, this is so different in every way from Hurley's. Sorry. I have the other one open on PDF and it's like, fuck. Holly, then to say the real versus reality is basically a reference to Lacan. Not directly. The Lacanian concept of the real is something that is, I think has become deeply pervasive in a lot of continental theory and critical theory in general at this point. For Freud just had sort of the id, ego, superego, and then, this internal process, and then you go out and it becomes expressed or sublimated into the social world. But for Lacan, and it wasn't just Lacan who did this. I know there's a setup, but I'm just going to give credit directly to him because he's the one who popularized it. The idea of the real as this inaccessible thing, that the world you see and how you're taking it in as seeing objects and symbols through the imaginary layer that is sort of building the world, because you can no longer directly just deal with things as it is, the way that animals do or babies do, things as they just are. You have to be applying meaning. That idea is one that he popularized. They're saying flatly, desire and production is the real. It produces the real as its product. They're all the same thing. They're all the same setup. That there is no translation happening here. Here I translate the real from reality in one line. I don't translate the real from reality in one line. Hurley adds lines here. Hurley, mine is quite literal. So if there are divergences, let me know when we get to the sentence. I'm assuming it's a couple ahead of here.
Oh no, I mean it literally being very literal. Where is it? Production. In the first sentence you read as desire produces the real, and then in the sentence that's highlighted, machines of desire, or no, sorry, it's the one before that. Desire produces the real, and then we say mental or psychic reality versus material reality or social production, whatever. So anyway, I'm just looking.
No.
I'm being a little.
For example, this sentence in Hurley's, this is almost word for word directly across. This is like a boring translation. This is the kind of thing like Google Translate would get right. Hurley doesn't have the ending, and would come to double them. That's just not in the English, which is fucking crazy, because the whole point of that's not stylistic. That's not a choice. This is like one of those many upsetting moments. The whole point for them is to say, hey, look, the theater has doubled the fantasy. So like,
yeah,
we have our factory where things are produced, right? The theater exists inside of us, and then we have the imaginary, which then also redoubles reality. We have an entire version of the way that production works that we have doubled. That's like their point. The sentence denies precisely this doubling operation that traditional psychoanalytic thought sort of is working with, and Hurley just deletes that. So you don't even like get back to that reference to the doubling, which they've used like 3 or 4 times, which is just God damn it. So yeah, there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of choices made for sure.
Yeah, totally. I just like that is super valid point that I see here. I was literally pointing it word for word, like in Hurley, it says desire produces reality, and then obviously Deleuze and Guattari said desire produces the real. So I was being a little nitpicky, but I
no.
You're getting at.
It's we are pedants. That is what we do. So don't ever being nitpicky here is perfectly fine. Can you explain why material reality does not mean reducing the psyche to neurons, molecules, and atoms? Well, those are concepts. So you mean that like the physical objects, because they're not doing anything. None of those things do anything. They're the bodies of things. So it does kind of reduce things to them, but that's also then we then go, oh, but we're adding this other layer on top. No, we don't do any of that. We'll be getting to like their response to physicalism is like in 2 paragraphs, but no, go ahead, Josh.
I don't think Josh was speaking.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were Josh.
I was just going to say, so, but this is not like Daniel Dennett functionalism, basically.
No,
Okay.
no, very much not.
Well, and that makes sense because that's what I was just intuiting. But then the way the question was phrased, it seemed like it was kind of like they were reducing it to physical processes. But with Dennett, I don't support Dennett completely. But to steelman him, I think he would argue that basically there's not an inner Cartesian theater, and that cognition is distributed across basically brain states.
Well, and sure. And again, I don't think they would go no, but they'd then ask, well, then how does meaning come about? And how do we determine what brain states are? And by the way, how do we determine these things? And
yeah,
that across time thing, which becomes the issue. Again, I go through this in my Stoic paper. And it's the stuff that I think really influenced Deleuze. Any brain state is just like a photo. It is the thing it is, but it is constantly changing. And how do we exist? And we do exist in time. We may be experiencing a sheer number, like 1 billion frames per second life, but we are only ever experiencing those 1 billion frames per second. Yet somehow it has smoothed out into being a consistent sort of flowing experience of life. That would be more where they're coming from. Like, hey, you've got all of these things. This is here and then this, and these things happen in time. These connections happen and then stuff. So how do we in time exist? And the physicalist reduction, there's more or less at bottom, it ends up becoming marbles clacking into marbles, which is incredibly unsatisfying. I've never heard like a really good reduction that gets to the point of like, well, how does it work? Well, stuff hits things and then we go, ooh, kind of it's.
Yeah. Well, so it's complicated because there is an argument to be made. So I mean, so Chalmers proposes there's a hard problem of consciousness, but then there's some neuroscientists, like for example, Anil Seth and Carl Friston, who argue that you can explain the reason for qualia from an evolutionary perspective, which is we want to differentiate the organism from their environment. And so I think they would argue that the reason we have these predictive processing of meaning constructed by the mind is because we want to separate the organism from the environment as a process, which might be resonant with some of what Deleuze is talking about, but in a more evolutionary way, if that makes sense.
Well, then the secondary question would be, would that then imply, and it seems to, even in Dennett, that, and maybe he doesn't go as far, but I would then ask, so then things that aren't physical are what? Like that would be the thing. And it starts becoming well, then we have, that's the real physical, the true material of things. Well, then, okay, but that's fine. But like, I feel stuff. Like, do you not think that I experience and I am a thing? This is one of those.
And that's the problem. That's the problem with it, is that
it's huge.
Yeah, it's definitely not something I think that the physicalist can explain. I would say that I'm not a physicalist. I'm a I don't know what my feel and mind body problem is. I think it's probably something like I'm something like an emergentist, where I think, or I have been recently flirting with like pan protopsychism. But the way I see the mind body thing is, I think there is an innate capacity for consciousness within matter, but it only really becomes actualized when, in the form of meaning and qualia and affect, when you have certain neuronal states with functions that organize together.
You're in the right, I'm just going to say you're in the right direction, and I'm not going to like disagree necessarily, because I think it's the fun stuff. But just to sort of go back to Josh's thing, there is, and you will see readings of Deleuze and Guattari that go very hard into the physicalism side of things, and you can get why. Like they use all of the words, like they do. They pull from the register, like the molecular. They talk of the energy being transferred. They appeal to biology throughout. Everything is machines, which is the machinic, which is machines are definitionally like that's a physicalist interaction, which the machinic phylum is. That's the idea. But they have a handful of things that they sort of counter it with, and I want to hit those because I think it'll help the rest of this paragraph too. And I'm taking a break from chat for 2 seconds. I'll get back to it. Don't worry. The first thing they do is they sort of talk about how machines work. And again, this is, I recommend anyone to read Daniel W. Smith's paper on the BWO, which I think it hits this, because their question explicitly is with the BWO and with what it comes to be called the plane of consistency. How do we have a machinic physicalist space, yet we also can have woman, man, love, poetry? Like we have organisms that are very much that thing that we're able to conceptualize of them, and how the fuck. And it's because their definition of the machinic and the physicalist is not that we have a brain state. It's a functional definition of all of it. By the cutting and connecting of the flows, is the sort of way they've talked about it so far in this chapter, for example. It's not the physical composition. It's not these parts are here, so therefore. It's everything is machinic. Everything is a machine. Everything is the syntheses of interruptions. It is not that everything is just physical stuff that connects. The second thing that they do, and it touches into this one, is the molecular and the intensive, the molecular intensive side of things are libidinal and intensive. It's not an extensive physical. So as we start talking a little bit more about BWO, we're on the way there right now, by the way. The way intensities themselves, the unmeasurables of things, the way they interact on the BWO, the way partial objects interact with them, the actual productivity of desire, there's no room in the physicalist interpretation of things that has room for the intensive libidinal quantities that are existing there. And the third thing, and it's, I think, a really interesting move. Again, Daniel W. Smith's paper on it is phenomenal. The BWO as a thing is actually counter-organism. They work very heavily to build a materialism that refuses reduction to the organic biological substrate. We don't want to naturalize the molecular into some sort of cybernetic physicalism, like Nick Land. Nick Land does this, and it's like the literal opposite of everything in all of their books. And that's a regression, because it is basically substantializing, making substance what they're defining as purely processual. And that's, I think, the big thing is their push towards that the Lucretian Bergsonism thing, where we're not really looking at here's the state of things, but instead understanding that any state is actually just based on the measurements that we've literally used to remove all the other becomings from things, which I think is a pretty significant response overall.
Hi, Brooks.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
It's been a while after. How you been doing?
Fucked with this PhD. Anyway, how are you?
It's surviving.
All right. I just wanted to ask you, since you touched on the topic, on the machinic assemblage or assemblages, then we're speaking about the machinic assembly existing in the virtual and in the actual. And in this, if that's what you're saying, or how would you put it? I wouldn't put anything in your mouth.
I think they're different registers, so I wouldn't necessarily say the machinic is always, like, it's not existing. It's in the virtual and the actual. Again, it's the registers don't really cross over like that as I understand them fully, but the machinic is the virtual space. I think you can shorthand it maybe. I'd have to think about it. I feel like there's something wrong with me saying it, and I'd have to dig into it a little bit, but I could probably shorthand it a bit.
Would it be, because I usually, the way I register the machinic assemblages is any machinic assembly is within the actual after the effectuation, as Guattari would put it. But what exists in the virtual is the machinic sphere. Does that make sense?
It does. I think
So,
I want to
okay.
be very careful using the language right now, because anyone who's reading the book along with us will be jumping to conclusions at this point that I think are not healthy. But generally, I would agree.
Okay, it's all right. Yeah. With that, then how would you relate the relation between both?
Colley demonstrates my point.
No, I mean with the plane of consistency and the plane of eminence.
Oh, so
'Cause-
here, this is
Yeah,
one of the
go ahead.
reasons that talking about the actual or the virtual, talking about the plane of what they're doing right now and what they do through these two books, which is Anti-Oedipus and Mille Plateaux, A Thousand Plateaus, is they're building a very particular ontology that they will then come to build new terms around and really refine. Within this book, there really isn't a plane of consistency in that sense. That's not a thing for them at this point. And it's important to have, for me, I believe it's an important understanding that they are, because the BWO and the plane of consistency are not identical concepts. They just don't work the same way. But the plane of consistency is a more refined version of it in particular usages. The virtual and the actual will be touched into here, but again, they're talking about it differently. So they're in a different place for right now, because they're trying to stay in the psychoanalytic, what I would argue is a more practical register than like What is Philosophy or Deleuze's cinema books, where he gets into all of those things and really develops all of that out.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just asked the question because you opened this part.
I
You
know.
talked about it.
I
so
know.
Sorry.
I know. No. We're in what is of incredibly fertile ground when it comes to ideas. That's what this part of the book is. And it is really fun. It is just fun. And this is the stuff that's like, oh, so they're saying this. No, they go on to absolutely beat the shit out of the things they're saying now, to like give it very particular critiques and show how these things interact and how we understand things. And again, breaking them down in ways that I think are fascinating, but it's hard not to just sort of jump and run. It's great. And just to mention, Colley, virtual versus machinic is not dualism. Dualism is has to do with material particularly. So if you're like, there's two things, that's not dualism, right? Like, you and I exist. Colley is a person, I'm a person. That's not a dualism. If I say that Well, actually, fundamentally, inside of me is a psychic realm. And then we have the rest of the realm outside of us. Those are two different natures, fundamentally. They're different materialities. They're different. That's dualism. The mind-body distinction is one of the oldest ones, but then there's the material and the transcendent. There's a bunch of these that exist. So it's not quite the same thing as a dualism, because there's the virtual is just a different concept than the machinic. It's not really the same sort of thing. Actually, on that, phantasms are rather secondary expressions which derive from the identity of the two sorts of machines in a given milieu. I know I said that incorrectly before when I was reading. That's okay. This is actually the main point of the paragraph, but it does relate to that. Fantasy is not something that sort of pre-exists us. Again, psychoanalysis very much puts fantasy, the imaginary, the symbolic, how these things work, upstream from you, upstream from your production, that it is what builds you. But the opposite is what they're saying here. They're saying phantasms are secondary expressions. To say it cleanly, phantasms, fantasy, the specific fantasies, phantasms, are actually downstream. They're an expression secondary of an identity that is primary to them. This is one of the ways that they reject the doubling, because again, we see the real world, we have a doubled fantasy of it in our mind, or we have a fantasy of it, and we see the real world, the doubling of everything into the personal fantasy realm that things exist within. They're tossing it away. They're saying, no, the identity of the two sorts of machines in a given milieu actually generates them. It's a secondary expression of it, secondary expression. And this is more or less Spinoza. Honestly, if we have a Spinoza reading, this is just Spinoza. Like, this is like boringly Spinoza. This is like straight up out, like, I want to say this is stuff like straight up out of the ethics. Like really. But the thing to focus on here is the phrasing, the secondary expressions. If fantasy is expressing an identity rather than founding a separate realm, right? Then fantasy is actually not the property of an isolated psyche. And they say, thus, the fantasy is never individual. It is group phantasm, as institutional analysis has known to show, and it has. The thing that they're saying, and they've been saying, Guattari's term, and this is why Guattari has pushed at his clinics he worked at, and really did a huge amount of work when it came to like group therapy and having people talk about these things at large. The institutional analysis that they're talking about is that it's always group fantasy. People express how they think the social space works, the fantasies they've been had. There's no such thing as like a personal fantasy realm that you express. Right? Does it make sense generally? They continue, and if there are two sorts of group fantasies, phantasms, it is because identity can be read in two senses. According to whether, this is the tough one, ready for this? According to whether machines of desire are grasped in the great gregarious masses that they form, or according to whether social machines are referred back to the elementary forces of desire that form them. This is, by the way, going to be also what closes the book. This is literally the final chapter of the book is on this sentence. So don't expect to completely get it. It's a lot. But it's kind of said simply, the two regimes of group fantasies that exist are ultimately derived from a single identity, a single moment, a single machinic thing, whatever you want to say, that's being read in two directions. It's not about two different phenomena. This is Nietzschean perspectivism, sort of at its best. right? And it's using Guattari kind of through all of this. It really helps to read Guattari. He's got a bunch of writings. But there is the subject groups and subjugated groups. This is the thing. And it's about looking at the group and whether or not, for example, whether the machines of desire are grasped in the great gregarious masses they form. Oh, I am a white man. I am a thing, gregarious. Or whether those social machines are referred back to the elementary of desires that forms them. When you think about how words work, and it's a lot, but when you think about how words work, when you call yourself part of a group, or when you realize you're part of a group, this happens to all of us awkwardly one point or another in our lives, religion, race, country, whatever. Do you feel uneasy? Is it you're calling yourself that because emergently that just is what makes sense? I'm fucking in the QC today. I guess I'm a quarantine collective guy. It sounds awkward to say. Is it in reference to the emergent machines that created that social machine, referring back to those elementary machines of desire? Or are you grasping all of the machines of desire in their gregarious form? That's, by the way, this is literally like awesome how simple they say this. But that's the thing. So they continue, and it's a lot said here. And I'm actually going to be from here, be talking about the Hurley because I can't help it. This is a lot. It can thus happen in group phantasm that libido invests the existing social field, including in its most repressive forms, or conversely, that it proceed to a counterinvestment that connects to the existing social field, the revolutionary desire. For example, the great socialist utopias of 19th century function not as ideal models, but as group phantasms, that is to say, as agents of the real productivity of desire that make a disinvestment or a de-institution of the present social field to the profit of a revolutionary institution of desire itself. I'm going to talk about the translation differences because Hurley, this is one of those big ones. There's actually a lot of things that they fuck with, and I really don't like Hurley's choices a lot. Hurley adds in this a source of energy, profit of a revolutionary institution of desire itself as a source of energy. Is how he kind of phrases that. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating. This kind of fucks with it because it's fully invented content. There's no, for this, they would not say that connects the existing social field, the revolutionary desire of energy. It's not a source of energy, as he said, as a source of energy, he says. That's not the thing. This is again, separating things out and breaking things down in a way that I think is incredibly problematic. He adds economic elements to this, to the profit of, in favor of. This is very different. He says to further, in favor of. They're using very specific economic registers for a fucking reason. Maybe I should explain the sentence. I get so mad. Sorry, I have Hurley up. I should just not do that when I read. The two regimes are an investment of the existing field. Okay? And this can extend to its repressive forms. This is the libidinal economy of fascism that we will pursue throughout chapter 3, and we'll be talking about how it builds in chapter 2. When we say the masses wanted fascism, which is the previous paragraph, right? They go over Reich. Why do they want fascism? Why is it not a revolutionary counterinvestment? Why is that not happening? And the example they give, and I mentioned it earlier because I kind of bleeded these paragraphs together, the socialist utopias and the way that they were talked about, especially there's a lot of specific things that they're hitting. But for them, it's like, this is not like a fantasy model ideality. Like, we're not thinking of a perfect thing we need to bring to Earth, which is commonly how we talk about the ideal of things, a Platonic model. We need to think about that, and we can know, then we can figure out how to bring that and make it work here. We're communists. We want everyone to be equal. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're bringing this idea. This is the thing. And they're like, that's not what is actually happening here. It's not an ideal model. It is group fantasy. It is productive, not regulative, which is one of the core differences. When you're talking about an ideality that you're then bringing, it's regulative. You're wanting to control, and that's how you consider it ultimately. They'll mention Fourier later. They really go over him a bit because it had to do with sort of the revolutionary model and how all of that worked. But the phrasing here is all intended to be about that way that desire is invested into the social. It is economic language, and it is intended to be that throughout, because they're doing marks for you. They're doing marks within you, more or less, would be the phrasing I would just make sure we just hit over and over and over. The word that everyone attaches to, or did it there already, deinstitution, is actually a neologism invented by our friend Felix, which is great. Guattari's phenomenal. The deinstitution is not meant to be considered deinstitutionalization. It's not that. He's pulling from that. He's fucking with words. But it's intended to be talked about in terms of the institutive revolutionary desire thing, as like half of the institution deinstitution coupling. So when we talk about institutionalize or deinstitutionalize, that kind of thing, you've got to be very careful, because this is not standard normal shit. This is not about deinstitutionalizing, like closing an asylum, for example, or removing someone from the institution. That's like a what we do to people. It's not that. It is think about when you have, like, actually just fucking, they're thinking about desire the way you might think about cash. Oh, you have a museum you like, so you go, and when you're walking through, you see the donation thing, you make your dollars into that, you institutionalize your dollars. You're investing in that place. You like it. You want it to stay there. Deinstituting, the deinstitution of the present social field is to remove desire. Deinstituting, the opposite move. That's why it's such a great phrasing. It's the opposite thing. The operation is the deinstituting of the social field as such, not the deinstitutionalization program, which is what often this gets assigned to, and poor Guattari gets assigned to kind of a lot. The whole point is the conceptual pairing. I've read that for like social institutions. It's not exactly that. He's playing with a very particular register. It's a very particular register. And again, it's not thinking about it as an institution overall, but the deinstitution of the present social field to the profit of a revolutionary institution of desire. Disinvestment is more direct here. Yes. All of it is far more direct than you're thinking, unless you are thinking it's immediate, because we're not talking about, this is Marx. Again, this is Marx. You don't just get a paycheck and you're like outside of capitalism. I get my paycheck and then, I wandered around. Now I'm outside of capitalism. I don't have to worry about it. No, that's not how it works. Oh, I started a co-op with my friends. We're outside of capitalism. That's not how that works either. Disinvestment and deinstitutionalizing your dollars is a thing that happens that is imminent to capital. This is always imminent to capital. Well, so is desire, the investment of the present social field or the disinvestment of it, the institution of it or the deinstitution of it. It is always formed immediately, coextensively, constantly. And it is meant to have that economic language. This is why one of those things that's like incredibly important to it, that I don't really care for the translation as well, Hurley's version of it, because this is Guillaume Sibertin Blanc, who wrote State and Politics, which is marrying Deleuze and Guattari to Marx fully. I cannot recommend it enough. It is about how this is, they're not like, there's no deep meaning here. The whole book has like less deep meaning than any, it's just the thing they're saying. It's the disinvestment here to the profit of the revolutionary institution of desire itself. And then they end. But between the two, between machines of desire and technical social machines, there's never a difference of nature, but only a distinction of regime according to relations of magnitude. They are the same machines with the difference of regime alone, and it is this that group phantasms show. This is it's hard to say how important this is to sort of understand all of it. There's never a difference in nature. Difference in nature means for him, for Deleuze in his writing, and for this book, very much what it means for Bergson. There's difference in kind, difference in nature, difference in kind. And it is a privileged difference as a thing. There's difference in kind versus differences in degree. The move that is being made here is denying a privileged difference between any of these things. If we're talking about a desire machine or a social machine, it's not a difference in kind, which is, by the way, a complete shift versus how people generally think about these things. Oh, it's like the impulses of you and the bank. Yeah, that's fucking, obviously that's a different. No. Nope. No. This is the thesis. And it's restating it almost in negation, but they're going to be qualifying it. They do very, very quickly. There is certainly a distinction, but only a distinction of regime according to relations of magnitude. When things exist at large, they're different than they are when there's only one of them. And it's the same stuff. Elon Musk's dollar is a lot of dollars. You have dollars. It's not the same thing. They're the same stuff. It's the same thing in nature. It's just a dollar. Well, that's $1 billion. But the magnitude of them changes how they work. Doesn't mean it's not the same shit. It's not this. It is the same shit. It's the same shit, but it functionally works differently. It's not a distinction of kind. It's a distinction of regime. Colley says, so group phantasms show that we'll get to there. We're almost there. That's the ending. I'll save that. But that's it. Maybe fuck it. Because they end, they are the same machines with a difference in regime alone. And it is this that group phantasms show. It is this that group phantasms show. They offer group fantasy of evidence because group fantasy is fundamentally where identity becomes legible. That's how group fantasy works. And this is, again, Guattari's writing, and they're going to be going into so much work to prove this out. But I'm an American. Why would I ever? I'm alone. I don't sit. It's a group fantasy fundamentally. It has to be, because this is where identity becomes legible. It's, this is just demonstration of it. The empirical state of how institutions function, and within the institutions of things, how groups have shared fantasies, how they have these things working together, and how they fuck around in this very particular way. And if we index desiring production to magnitude, not differences of kind, but now differences of degree, again, through this is Bergson-y language, but it's really well used here. This is the thing. This is where we start to see that final identification, which is what they sort of finish off here. Yeah. So group phantasms, revolutionary libidinal economy would be the same as what we've just changed to magnet. Where identity becomes legible is within group. When identity is legible, it's a question of whether that legibility is being read towards the direction of identifying the large molar part and capturing desiring production underneath it, subjugated group, or whether it is being read from the position where the group is actually subordinated to the desiring production underneath it. The easier version of this, and it isn't capturing it exactly, but it's close, is the difference between happening to be a member of a group or being a member of a group. So, like, I play video games. Like, I do. I don't call myself a gamer. There's a fucking reason for that. There's a fucking really good reason for that. But I play games. Yeah, sure. If someone were to say, "Oh, Brooks, oh yeah, he's a gamer," I'm not gonna like fight him on it. But I'm not a capital G gamer, which is really embarrassing as a human being, generally speaking. Being part of the group and having, again, think of it as the way that the directionality of group creation or your integration in that group functions. Always the group comes from the moment of identity. The moment of identity is either in service of one direction or the other. One direction or the other. That's the difference. One direction or the other. That's how I'd phrase it. We always have group identification. We always understand ourselves as part of that. Every fantasy is primarily a group fantasy because group is where identity comes from. They spent everything in this book so far building up how the schizophrenics in, for example, Malloy. We go over Malloy, he's asked by the guards, or Lynn's going for a walk. What is Lynn's? Who is Lynn's? Well, he identifies as this. Are you this religion? Who's your parents? Who's your mom? Who's your dad? Where do you live? All of these things are where identity forms. Identity forms as group. It always forms in relation to group. And when identity forms, is it in, because Lynn's, when he's going for his walk, still Lynn's. He's something completely different. He's whatever he's doing there, or he is predetermined under these social creations. One direction, one direction, one direction, one direction. And that directionality is what sort of sets everything up. It's either in line with and in maintenance of the group, or it is a counter investment, a deinstitution of the present social field. And that's the line. I think it's phenomenal. But thus the phantasm is never individual. It doesn't just exist. There's no private internal realm where you have your own factory that is ultimately really a theater and is set up in that way. These things only show up at the moment of group. When in group, out group, whatever, but group. And that group phantasm, and they go over it, they say, and they will go over it in depth in chapter 2. But the way that institutional analysis has functioned and what Guattari's work, I think, really worked to show is that that's where the schizo, that's where the autist, that's where the mentally ill, they have those collisions, because it's either that they are grasping their desiring machines in terms of the group, or they're grasping the group in terms of their desiring machines. And one is subordinated to the other. If I were to do the Daniel Smith, I think, makes a really, again, BWO paper is really great. We can talk about the phylums of animals and the genetic makeup of animals. Are we talking about the animal, or are we talking about its genetic makeup? Well, we're always talking about both. You're always talking about the things are made of when you refer to them. I'm eating Doritos. I'm drinking fucking tea. I'm looking at like, is it that I'm doing this in order to subjugate, where I'm talking about the grouping, the collection, the thing, in order to have it towards the certainty, towards the sameness, towards the maintenance of the whole? Or is it a counter investment that goes the other direction, that is actually utilizing, because we talk, like words are fine, but that identification, that identity that happens to come about at that moment of group, is it in service of desiring production, which is itself productive? This is going to be a fun one. This is going to be a fun one. I think it's going to be a fun one. I mean, it may not be a fun one for everyone, but it's going to be a fun one for me. This is good shit. This is good shit. This is good shit. This next paragraph. We're going to get through it. Don't care if we go over. There's art in this one, by the way. Lots of art here. Let's see. So Kali says, I'll join the Deleuze study group, but I wouldn't call myself a member of the DGQC. Or maybe you do. I'm a DGQCer. That all of these things, like you are, by the way, you are. By being here, you're doing things. Identity is formed. You're forming identity in every moment constantly. And that collision of identity is creating either a directionality that is subordinating desiring production to those large gregarious elements, or is taking the gregarious element as the thing and capturing everything beneath it. You're always doing only those. Like identity is socially negotiated. In the strictest academic sense, yes, but it's also constantly produced always. It's always constantly produced. Oh, that's my favorite. The transracial woman. Whatever happened to her? Didn't she change again? And she was a nutcase.
Are you referring to the Mrs. Rachel Dolezal?
Yeah, the Dolezal.
Yeah.
I
think
Eric Andre did some amazing sketches around her. Well, around doing the Dolezal, which was incredibly offensive and kind of wonderful.
I'm not certain about this, but I'm pretty sure she got kicked out of the NAACP for some of the stuff she did.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, people are fascinating, but identity is itself. This is Todd McGowan has a piece, and well, I don't agree with Todd on like the realities of life or anything, but and I think this is why Zizek and Lacan and a lot of people get this right as well, is the understanding of like in Lacanian psychoanalysis, there's a lot of more complexity, but you kind of end in a lot of the same point where it's about, hey, are you trying to constantly have total certainty in a thing and break things down to the tiniest version of itself to have true identity perfected? And Todd McGowan goes over, this is why identity politics is ultimately reactionary versus revolutionary. And he talks about the universal, and it's paradoxical. The universal is actually about understanding the complete contingency of everyone, whereas reactionary politics is very much about everyone getting a perfect identity socially. And his breakdown of this, I think, is phenomenal. It is the same kind of thing. The question is, are you part of a group in order to have maintenance of that group, in order to have maintenance of the norm, in order to maintain things? And when I say maintain, I'm using that word in the economic sense. You're expending or expelling or whatever you're doing energy things that maintains a word, that maintains a group, that maintains a fantasy. Are you investing in that? Are you institution as a thing? Or are you deinstituting? Are you disinvesting? And you're actually counter-investing even more ideally. And you can do so with the same thing, which is the whole point. This is why, and we'll get to it again, chapter 4 is kind of going to be about this, but this is like preceding that. There's the way that you can be in a really weird place where people who are ostensibly communists and fighting for things that they want everyone to be equal, and then they end up like Haas and Infrared, where they're fucking mega communist nutcase lunatics, because that's not really what they're into. They're into the maintenance of the things versus the breaking down and the revolutionary. This is why also, by the way, you can find people who absolutely somehow are invested in Christian republicanism and actually do, because of how they're invested in it, they're actually overturning things within it and breaking things and shifting stuff. Is it always good? No. Is it always bad? No. But it's about that directionality within how these groups function.
I want to chime in a little bit from the other side of the structuralist. I actually 99.999% agree with what is being discussed here, because supposedly I am posited in a coordinate of the discourse that is supposed to be very quote quote progressive, and I can put into bodily symptoms of how reactionary these groups can be. And I did not start to experience any side of these, identity politics that's beneficial until I started to go into the more analytic discourse that examine the interdiscourse space. So even if there is any kind of benefit that I could not observe because of my coordinates and position in the discourse, it was not available to be comprehended until I shifted outside of such progressive discourse into the analytic discourse. So I'm not saying like, oh yeah, there's no benefit of focusing on identity politics whatsoever, but from the other side, that it's possible to have an internal limit. This is probably just another one of those lies that's cover up a neoliberalism. So 99.9999% agree with here. It's not. I'm not trying to deny that there's no benefit whatsoever, but those benefits are simply not comprehensible, not accessible, and generate nothing in analytic discourse or artistic discourse or philosophical discourse whatsoever. It's just inaccessible. So I want to chime in a little bit. It's very rare that I agree with the deconstructionist that much, but I just really want to.
I mean, this is really good Lacan. To be very frank, like this is a very refined version of, I think, Lacan's later work. Zizek even has bits that I think echo this very, very well. Guattari didn't come out of nowhere. He was built out of a very particular strain, and I think, did what he did. But there's a reason that you end up in these pockets where all of these people like very much agree. But the underlying thing is like, why? Well, how do we get there? And that's where it kind of starts to really matter, because how we get there is also how we fix it, because then we start having disagreements.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't even read that much Lacan. Second of all, I think there's high potential on focus on the idea of the obscene, and maybe even some parallel between psychoticism, hysteric, or this not hysteric, but neuroticism and his like psychoticism, but that's already a very, very specific discourse. So even if we want to remain inside of the generalized discourse, these terminologies already dragging the coordinates of the people in a very far away land. So for me, it's not like there is no use of the generalized discourse, specifically identitarian discourse, but the inaccessible knowledge of psychoanalysis, especially in North America, it already kind of denatures what kind of thing can come out of that production. Like that, not a lot of things can make a lot of sense just because this kind of discourse is so specific. But again, I do think the idea of the obscene father is one of those very few bridges that goes to the both sides of deconstructionist schizoanalysis and some sort of generalized discourse.
Well, and I think you're going to be going in this paragraph, we're going to be going through a lot of art. And basically they're going to be using art here to talk about the art. Well, and I think you're going to be going in this paragraph, we're going to be going through. Thank you, Robert. Or someone muted Robert. Thanks for joining, Robert B. Yes, it's my uncle's name. We're going to be going through a lot of art, and the thing to be as we're doing that is we're going through this paragraph, and I kind of, because I know LJ, you're very artsy, and you very much are into like how we can use things for that. This is a very explicit statement here about group fantasy and how art, as they're going to be talking about it here, art produces group fantasies that short circuit the productive differences between the machinic and desire. And
yes, thank you. And also
that there's a smuggling that happens in there, that the breakdown function gets smuggled into technical objects, and how art itself is actually the technical object with that breakdown smuggled into it.
And I would like to clarify that I started doing art, or I became interested in intersection of art and schizoanalysis because it's a semiotic exercise of whatever ontological boundary of the fantasy and the real. And at that point, I didn't know I was reading Lacan, but I was already into a lot of Lacanian structure. So, I am into this emptiness of the
Good,
meaning
because
of this word.
it's going to be fun.
Yeah. It's just when you say, you're artsy, some people that is not quite familiar with the conversation might mistake
Right,
me
that's
for
fair.
some other kind of identitarian person that also named themselves artists.
Well, you
So
want
I would like
to
to
talk
clarify
about
that.
the idea of how identity forms at the moment of group. That's kind of exactly the point. So
Yeah,
let me
exactly.
read.
And,
Let me read. We'll get this going.
I'll mute now.
The thing I want to go through, I just mentioned there, we're going to be talking about art. I'm probably not going to be able to bring up all the examples on screen. It's worth reading through. We're going to talk a little bit through each one of these. If someone wants to post them in the Discord, probably fair enough, but it's less important. The thing that is going to be the big thing here is, as they've been building to this point, and they've been talking about this parallel between social and desiring production, they're going to, I don't want to say walk back a little bit, but they're going to be talking about there being actual relations that are different than things. Okay, Marx as a person, when Marx talked about the regimes of production, how there's capital at large, the large superstructure versus the structure of any specific factory versus the person versus labor, all of these different things, Marx was explicit about how this is all production happening at once, that there isn't like a person works, then something's made, then it's distributed, then it's sold. It's like, no, all of these things are actually the same process, just snapshots of different moments. Please read fucking Marx. This means that these elements actually, because they are snapshots of the same process, they're all one, but they have implications on each other. So it is not to say, when we say desiring production and social production, technical machines, all that, when we say that they're all, it's the difference of regime, this is not to say that they don't fuck with each other. They do. They fuck with each other a lot, and they have limits and a lot of shit. So that'll be the setup. Okay? Just be ready for that. When we previously sketched a parallel between social production and desiring production to show, in both cases, the presence of an anti-production instance prompt to fall back on productive forms and appropriate them for itself, this parallelism prejudged nothing about the rapport between the two productions. We could only specify certain aspects concerning the distinction of regime. First, technical machines obviously function only on the condition of not being broken down. Their proper limit is wear, not breakdown. Marx can base himself on this simple principle to show that the regime of technical machines is that of a firm distinction between means of production and product, by virtue of which the machine transmits to the product the value, and only the value it loses in wearing away. Machines of desire, on the contrary, never cease to break down in running, only broken down. Always some producing grafts itself on the product, and the pieces of the machine are equally combustible. Art often uses this property in creating veritable group fantasies that short-circuit social production with desiring production, and introduce a function of breakdown into the reproduction of technical machines, such as Armand's burned violins, César's compressed cars. More generally, Dalí's method of critical paranoia assures the explosion of a machine of desire in an object of social production. But already Ravel preferred breakdown to wear, and substituted for slowdown or gradual extinction sudden stops, hesitations, vibrations, misfirings, breakages. The artist is the master of objects. He integrates into his art broken, burned, broken down objects to return them to the regime of machines of desire whose breakdown is part of the very functioning. He presents paranoiac, miraculous, bachelor machines as so many technical machines, all while mining technical machines with machines of desire. More than that, the work of art is itself a machine of desire. The artist amasses his treasure for a near explosion. That is why he finds that destructions, truly, do not come fast enough. Such a fucking good line. Such a fucking good line. I have to be taller with it, LJ. Because, who cares? Who gives a fuck? All right. Let's do it. We're just going to fucking go. When we previously, this is actually really dense for as short as it is. When we previously sketched a parallel between social production and desiring production, to show in both cases the presence of an anti-production instance prompt to fall back on productive forms and appropriate them for itself, this parallelism prejudged nothing about the rapport between the two productions. I'm not going over Hurley here. Stop it. I'm not going to go over Hurley. I need to stop it. This is their caveat before they make a larger sort of substantial claim that is going to be the minor reforming. It's going to be in line with what I was just talking about, the way that subjugation happens with desiring production. Like I was talking about that. Groups, we have our identity exists. Is it in service of one? It's a perspectival thing. Is the direction desiring being captured by that? Or is the larger thing in service of desiring production? These two things, the capture, the wording I'm using, the setup, this interaction is actually a thing that is constantly ongoing. Always, always, always. Really, really big deal. Really fucking big deal at this point. And so here they're being very simple. The earlier talk they had about anti-production in the first few sections, talking about how the BWO folds back, folds production into itself. The distinction of regime between the molar and molecular, as they've talked about it, that they've been using, and we just got through in that last paragraph. This sentence is basically naming two things that this parallel can yield. Shows in both cases, we sketched a parallel between them, to show in both cases the presence of an anti-production instance prompt to fall back on productive forms and appropriate them for itself. This parallelism prejudged nothing about the rapport between the two productions. That's the rapport between the two. We could only specify certain aspects concerning the distinction of regime. I mean, I don't think I can even expand on that. Some things with this regime, the molar, are different than the other ones. That's what they've named the ways that these things operate slightly differently and how they sort of semi-interact, but they haven't gone deep into the rapport between the two, the way that these things sort of play at each other. Again, they are the same in kind. They're different in degree. This doesn't mean they don't fuck with each other at regime level. So the first, technical machines obviously function only on the condition of not being broken down. Their proper limit is wear, not breakdown. This is Marx. A technical machine. Your computer either works or it doesn't. There's an old gag back when I was late 90s, early 2000s. Monster Cable sold like $500 fucking gold-plated diamond cables because it had a perfect signal. And the hilarity that sort of exists for that, for digital things and technical things, is that a signal either gets somewhere or it doesn't. In old analog systems, we could talk about it. But when we're talking about like an HDMI cable being gold-plated or diamond-headed, there's no better digital signal. The shit works or it doesn't, because the whole point is with the technical machine, we presume integrity. It functions by not breaking down. It's doing its thing. Now, it can wear. We'll get to that in a second. But if a thing's broken, it's not a technical machine anymore. Okay. It's very particular. The technical machine, just, it works or it's not a machine. That's the way it works. Marx used this. As they say, Marx can base himself on this simple principle to show that the regime of technical machines is that of a firm distinction between means of production and product, by virtue of which the machine transmits to the product the value, and only the value it loses in wearing away. Capital, please go read fucking Capital. The way constant capital and machinery function together, specifically how fixed capital transmits value to the product only piecemeal in proportion to the depreciation of it. In parlance today, if I have a factory, I am building into the price of everything that factory puts out, everything it takes to keep shit running. That is not just the person's labor. The machines wear. Machines wear. They get shittier over time. Like, that's how it works. Things break down. You have to build it in. In theory, AI is building in costs of how they have to amortize all these graphics cards and A100s and H100s and whatever the fuck Blackwell shit is coming next. These things have to be factored into the cost that they charge people. The factory as a whole thing, if it's not functioning, it's not that. But everything that does function, everything that builds, doesn't break down. It wears down, right? And this is Marx's value transfer theory. And it requires the separation fundamentally of means and product. It requires the technical machine to wear, but not break down. That's the sort of big deal here. Machines of desire, here's the fun part. Machines of desire, on the contrary, never cease to break down in running. Run only broken down. Always some producing grafts itself onto the product, and the pieces of the machine are equally combustible. The parts of the machine are just as much as the fuel, I probably should say, but that's okay. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I can probably change that, actually. Sorry, just got the French up a little bit. Because it's it is actually probably not equally combustible. They're the fuel. They are the fuel. They are the combustible element. That's probably better. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, desiring machines are basically inverted in every way what technical machines are. They run by breaking down. That the break, the cut, the interruption is how the next thing is able to connect, is how the next thing is able to be done. Producing and product are the same. The desiring machines consume themselves. Everything within the connective syntheses is internally self-referential, right? So connection here is a positive term and the first difference of regime. And that's how art functions. This is why they're going to be going into art. Art often uses I'm only going to be able to describe this, I think, as we go through the example. Art often uses this property in creating veritable group fantasies that short circuit social production with desiring production, introduce a function of breakdown into the reproduction of technical machines. Art is where the design regime period, like fundamentally and is deliberately injected into technical social objects. They're using art as the example here, but this is, again, the way that these things work. The use of group fantasy here from the previous paragraph where we sort of had this first time introduced, right? The way that group fantasy works, the directionality of it is in service of which regime. The art examples they're going to be using aren't aesthetic choices. This isn't that. This is productive. This is instances of two regime identity made visible. These are the worked cases of showing this. So Armand's burned violins, his pressed cars. Okay. Can I do this without having, I don't think I can. Let me see if I can find. No one in Discord did their job for this one. posted pictures of these things, so I'll fucking go do it. You people sicken me. All right, so are violins burned? Like, if you burn a violin, how does it work? Does it work well? This sounds stupid as I'm saying it, but I'm not fucking around here. This is... Come on. Okay. Everyone should be seeing now a violin that doesn't work. Okay? I'm not being... It's a violin. Do you see it? It doesn't work. That's a violin that doesn't work. But so Armand was part of this nouveau realism thing that happened in France, and also did a bunch of this where he would take these crazy instruments and he would burn them like this. They could also be called the chart. I think they're called the chart instruments. In generally, doesn't matter. They're destroyed. They're destroyed. And then I'm just going to give the other example, which is Baldacchini's Cars, which is, I think, called Compressions. And yes, if you don't know what that is when I say it out loud, what do you think it is? Anyone want to take a guess? It's the kind of thing that, like, genuinely AI just can do now. And it's like, this is the kind of stuff that'll be lost in time, which is very, very sad. All right. Because they're cubes of cars. They're cars crushed into cubes. The point of it, of all of this entire regime, and again, you may not feel anything. I don't give a fuck if you feel anything. But the point is, it's like 4 cars, by the way, in that cube, which is very impressive, to be perfectly frank, as a thing. I think. I would argue. But this setup and what they're doing, they're literally using, like, the endpoint that, again, our position now to look at this is very unique because we're looking back 60, 70 years, I want to say, maybe older. I think it was early 1960s, late 1950s, as the industrialized sort of world was carrying on. Art was starting to become something else. And the point of this was taking these industrial products and showing them as destroyed. Showing them as destroyed. And that's the point they're using. They use the example, and they talk about it next. More generally, Dali's method of critical paranoia assures the explosion of a machine of desire in an object of social production. And I don't know exactly what specific thing they're naming, but the way that Dali wrote about his own works, the Conquest of the Irrational, his book, his method was paranoiac critique. And for him, they're aligning almost with Dali's paranoia and saying that his paranoia is this productive, exploding, desiring machine. They'll be playing with the paranoiac in terms of its despotic molar pole later, but this is a very particular type of delirium that again, just be careful with talking about it. It's a critical paranoia. That's what he played with. But they're talking about it like the explosion of a machine of desire in an object of social production. And I'm going to see if I can play. Maybe we can play. I wonder if I'll get copyright struck. I think I'll get copyright struck, but I think it might be probably the best bet for me to do this. One sec, sorry. Two seconds. But already Ravel preferred breakdown to wear, substituted for slowdown or gradual extinction, sudden stops, hesitation, vibrations, misfirings, and breakages. We listened to this last time, and I think we're gonna do it again. One sec. Yep, you go here, and Maurice Ravel was a unique composer, and I don't have. Don't fucking go to Les Schwab for tires. Sorry, everyone. Oh my God, Geico Lizard 2. I'm logged into the wrong fucking account again. God damn it. Doesn't matter. So, we're going to jump a little bit, but just the language. Very, very specific language they use here. Sudden stops, hesitations, vibrations, misfirings, breakages. Okay? That is not, audio is not coming through there. Fucking great. That's my favorite thing. One second. Now it went away. Wonderful. All right. You should be able to hear it also in Discord. Is it not? Is the audio playing in Discord? We're going to jump a little bit. Beautiful, by the way. Genuinely. The point is to listen to how his music ends, so I have to play the rest of it. Sorry. I'll probably get copyright struck, but whatever. The way he writes. It ain't AI. That's the thing. No. I really like it myself. So his endings of his writings, his work has really odd, and it's one of the things he stood out for. There's a really fantastic book that they actually are citing here. Jankelevich wrote a book on Ravel, and his endings were brusque, we'll say. They came out of nowhere. They fuck with the rest of the song in a way that's like almost unsatisfying, but also feels really good. I find it fascinating. And again, this is intended to be in juxtaposition to artists of the time and composers who tend to make really grand final endings or slow, soft endings. He didn't do that. It's really beautiful. So he has a very unique style, very particular. Their point of this is that Ravel didn't slowly let his music wear down. He built into it, and I would argue we could have this conversation about a lot of different music now. That we prefer breakdown to wear. That we enjoy that. His thing though is he substituted for slowdown or gradual extinction, sudden stops, hesitations, vibrations, misfirings, and breakages. That's their point. The artist is the master of objects. He integrates into his art broken, burned, broken down objects to return them to the regime of machines of desire, whose breakdown is part of their very functioning. He presents paranoiac, miraculous, bachelor machines as so many technical machines, all while mining technical machines with machines of desire. It is a lot, but the artist remachines elements that were machined. Technical machines and objects. Objects are products of technical machines. Sound, music, violins, cars, whatever. Doesn't matter. The artist remachines technical objects and presents all of these three desiring machine types sort of in the guise of technical machines, by mining the technical with desiring. So, yeah, it's they're just using this as the connective element of these. Yeah. More than that, the work of art is itself a machine of desire, which is a very specific elevation, escalation of what they've been trying to say here. It's not so much that art deploys desiring machines, which again, some people take as that way. No, they're saying it. The work of art is itself a machine of desire. It is one. The artist amasses his treasure for a near explosion. That is why he finds that destruction truly does not come fast enough. Artists, and it's a funny way to flip this around. Destruction for artists often is not really regret. It's more impatience. They're hoarding objects. Artists hoard objects or figura for this. They're hoarders of these treasures, right? And the expenditure, the explosion is the point. It just can't come fast enough. The explosion closes out for them the metaphor of these mining of desiring machines. Like the language they're using in French is very much about mining, by the way, all the way through. Yeah, you should be seeing it pretty cleanly too.
Yeah.
They're really hard about that language. And it's because they're really pulling on this idea that like the artist as hoarder for explosion, basically, which the next paragraph is going to be handed to. We might just do the next paragraph. Fuck, I don't know. But desiring machines are producing their own thing, their own breakdown, their own explosion internally, all by themselves. It doesn't fall on them from the outside. But the social machine it does.
Real quick. So two things. So first, I do got to get going in a minute, but I do have a question before I go, which is, do Deleuze or Guattari ever talk about the relationship between art and temporality? And the reason I ask is this: I haven't read a lot of Husserl, but from the excerpts of Husserl I read, and then from lectures I've heard, he one of the reasons for his view on like the what William James would call the specious moment, where the past, present, and future are sort of impregnated together, is this idea that when you experience art, especially music, the past, present, and future sort of collide. I'm curious if Deleuze touches on something similar to that.
Oh my. So let's talk about it's 3 books specifically, but it touches on in maybe all the rest of his books. What is Philosophy has an entire section called What is Art? And it is about this from that perspective. Specifically though, the cinema series, which is called The Time Image and Movement Image, you might guess, deals a bit with temporality and movement in art because it's about cinema. And it very much, by the way. And also it's where Deleuze, I think, refines his concepts of the virtual and actual the most. The most pointed version of this, I think, though, is going to be the logic of sensation, which is in America, we call the book Francis Bacon, Deleuze's book on Francis Bacon. It's called The Logic of Sensation, though, because, again, Deleuze is primarily a philosopher of logics. And how sensation operates and how these things exist in time is very much the point of the book. Like, he doesn't just kind of touch it. He kind of like, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Okay. Then if that's the case, I will check out some resources for what is probably not what is philosophy, but I'll check out the one on Bergson and cinema, because I have heard of that. Because I am interested in this relationship.
The cinema series is phenomenal. The cinema series is phenomenal. We had a reading for a bit. We may do it again. The book is incredibly complicated, but such like a masterpiece. Logic of Sensation is phenomenal and an easy read. I would probably recommend that because it's very much up the alley of what you're talking about, and the language of all of the things I think can be very fun for Deleuze.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'll try. I'll see if I get time to check out Logical Sensation. Although I've got some things in my personal life that I'm doing first, but we'll see. But thank you for the recommendations.
At some point, we're going to be doing we're going to try to be doing a reading of it, I hope.
Yeah.
So we'll be figuring it out. But yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, okay. So yes, Deleuze hits on all of those things. Is a short version. Yeah, temporality is like incredibly important to Deleuze. So, and here I think he even like Logic of Sense and others, he even directly addresses like he plays with a lot of Husserl's shit a lot actually. So it's going to be fun. And yeah, Colley, this paragraph is for Hurley. This is one of the worst. Like there's a lot here I really hate that Hurley does. The Ravel thing, for example, but already Ravel preferred breakdown to war. It's a very simple sentence. And Hurley just adds shit. Ravel preferred to throw his inventions entirely out of gear rather than let them simply run down, and choose to end his compositions with abrupt breaks, hesitations, tremolos, discordant notes, and unresolved chords, rather than allowing them to slowly wind down or to close or gradually die away into silence. Fuck me. Like, none of that language is fucking there. And also it's adding, it's technically not wrong. Like, this is one of those things. It's like when I tell people, like, it's there's no sentence there. Well, there are a couple, but there's no sentence. It's like, well, that's fucking terrible. That's a whole book. Every single sentence is off by just enough that you end up in a place that's very broken. This entire paragraph, Hurley takes the register that they're playing with. The list in French, for example, which is the ones I use, those are mechanical words. They're not words about music. The slow down or gradual extinction, sudden stops, hesitations, vibrations. Arrest brusque, trepidations, ratés, casa, like the malfunctioning engine is how you use those words. I would usually use those words not for music, but for my car, right? And he's like, oh no, we're just going to switch it to music. So now it's a music machine. And it's like, what? What? Why is it a movie? Why is it a music machine as a thing? That doesn't make any sense at all. And he does that. And I mean, he does it throughout this. It's just really terrible. Very frustrating. So frustrating. Yeah. The other one, I have a note that, like, this is one of those paragraphs that, like, sent me down the fucking rabbit hole. The line, machines of desire, on the contrary, never cease to break down and run only broken down. Always some producing grafts itself on the product, piece of the machine are equally combustible. And the phrasing in the French is les pièces de la machine sont ensuite bien les combustibles. I'm probably going to change that translation. Les pièces de la machine sont la combustible. The parts of the machine are just as much the fuel, is probably, because it doesn't read, I think. I know what it means, and that's the problem. But the sentence in the French is the pieces of the machine, when it breaks down, the pieces are the fuel that start it back up. Right? Do you understand the difference? Like, it's the pieces of the machine are equally combustible. They're equally the fuel of the machine itself. That's what the sentence is talking about. Hurley's is desiring machines, on the contrary, continually break down as they run, and in fact only run when they're not functioning properly. Fucking what the fuck, dude? It's really bad. It's really bad. This one's very bad. It's just backwards. His phrasing, the product is always an offshoot of production, implanting itself upon it like a graft. That language is actually as far as possible as you can get from the original French. Because the point is, du produire, some producing, which grafts itself onto the product. Producing, then product. But for Hurley, he reverses. The product is an offshoot of production, implanting itself upon it. Now the product, in his sentence, the product is what implants itself on production. No. The whole point, and it's like desiring machines, the way that they work, they keep attaching to the product so that the means and product separation that we had in the previous sentence actually never holds up. That's the point. They're contrasting it with technical machines. Technical machines, by virtue of which the machine transmits to the product the value, and only the value it loses in wearing away. This is almost a mirror image of that. It's not the same thing. It's like a mirror image, an opposing image. The pieces of the machine are the fuel. Producing grafts itself onto the product, not the product grafts itself into. It's fucking so frustrating. Was Hurley just trying to make it more difficult? I continually think Hurley was trying to make it more accessible, because their language is in a register that is very complicated in and of itself. And this entire paragraph, and also all of these paragraphs, they are using the language of machines, and you can, I mean, I don't know. I think he was trying to fix that. I don't know. It's very frustrating. But it's like literally the opposite. And that's one of the things. This is one of those paragraphs that just makes me nuts. Like, his characteristic failures of adding color and flavor and things that fuck things up, or even, as he did, severely inverting everything. It destroys the machine conceit, that the point of this passage. Let me try to do that, and then we'll probably get done here. The passage is trying to really talk about the two phyla of machines, the desiring machines and technical machines. And it's not that they are the same thing or they operate the same. That would be weird, because we're talking about abstractions of production. They actually work differently. And when we talk about the way that these things work, like Hurley, for example, he fractures détrachement across all the renderings. He flips the function of it into a negative dysfunction. That is not it. It is supposed to be the function of. He just breaks it. The whole point of the entire thing is that desiring production is functioning in a different way, in this particular way, when it comes to the produced and production itself and how they're constantly connecting and building. The technical machine, which is machinic file, it's a different setup. A technical machine breaks down, it is no longer machine more, it's trashed. It wears down over time, and that wear down is built into the final product, not for desiring production. It doesn't do that. Frustrating. But it's a good paragraph. I think it's a great one. I think it's a good one. So frustrating. It's just, sorry, I get in my head and then I'm like, this is the odd place we get into where it's like, genuinely, I think at this point, we're probably a year away from AI that can do this translation and probably do it as well as I did, probably better. And it will have minor problems throughout the entire thing, but this is worse. This is like just a literal translation in Google Translate would be better than this. So frustrating. Think Hurley was up to speed. Hurley was a professor of philosophy. Like, this was his thing. How much stoicism in Deleuze was massively influenced by the Stoics. And I mean, through Nietzsche and Spinoza and Stoicism. I mean, he used them all the time in sort of all of his works. It was an extraordinary back and forth as a thing. Yeah. Oh, so frustrating. Okay. Let's try to summarize the day so I don't end on like a bitchy thing. Try not to end on a bitchy thing. Oh, 1 second. I don't know what the fuck that's for. All right. Previously, we'd been talking about the distinction of regime, that there is a distinction. And again, the regime is not a difference in kind. It's a difference in regime. And they open by talking about how there's this social desiring parallelism that doesn't actually have a thing that's settled by the actual relations of the two. They go through the way that the differences in regime operate. The technical machine operates by wearing down, not breaking down. Its technical limit is wear. Living Currency, Klosowski goes over this really, really well. A desiring machine, however, the opposite, it only runs by breaking down. It only runs by fusing, producing with product, by burning itself and its own parts as fuel. The art that they go over is to them the most visible version of this. The production of and the sight of them produces group fantasies that short circuit the two productions, where the breakdown and the broken down technical machine somehow sees within it the opposite. The breakdown function installed in machines sees an explosion in desiring production as emotive, foundational, affective experience explodes in a billion different directions. Looking at it, it's completely an inversion of how they operate. And the two paragraphs that we've gone over are about this setup the demolition of this idealist conception of desire. And here, the first introduction of what I would account for as a positive accounting of how desire itself functions. Again, eliminating the idea of an idealized or lack-based system. They're showing this is actually not about lack. It's actually productive and continually productive and building and building and building. When was the translation created? Hurley's came about in the mid-70s. Mine is over the last 3 years. And with that, any questions, any last notes, anything before we head out? And it's worth the interlude interruption we had where we talked about physicalism for a little bit is actually really important to this. And I do want to, I think we're going to be going over it a lot. They're going to be going over physicalism a lot, like the crude materialist view. But like the point of this is when we talk about like the material as production, right? That's what Marx did. Material is as production. There isn't material that is then going through production. Production is material. That's Marx. And they're just bringing that across everything. Breaking down is the second synthesis of desire. Breakdown is within the second synthesis. Breakdown isn't the second synthesis. Second synthesis is registration. The registration. And registration happens as within the first synthesis, breakdown occurs. So they're imminent to each other, so it's not really orderly 1, 2, 3. And it's like not one stops and then we have the second and the third. It's not like, that setup. They're imminent in process to each other, but the breakdown within the first causes and creates the second and builds that. Hurley's practical philosophy is fine. He translated that. He also translated a lot of Bataille, which I went back through and I've got issues. So, yeah. Our technical machines made of desire machines are totally different. Define different, I think would be how I'd ask Holly. Like a violin in a car is a technical machine, correct? But it's also there are also desire machines under particular conditions. They're all the same thing. It's an order of regime thing. And the regimes interact with each other in ways that are unique because at scale things do. Again, think about it like money. I think money is the easiest way because Marx talked about this, and this is, again, things are production. The material of the world is production. It isn't physical substrate for Marx. It's production. Things are being produced constantly, and production is it. They're taking it to like a very, very much further sort of direction. Collie, audio cutting out or just you? It might just be you. I don't know. But I lost my place now. God damn it. Money, cash. Hopefully you can hear me, Collie. You get a paycheck. This is just, you get $1,000. You can do a lot of things with this. You can go buy like 2 Nintendo Switches or a bunch of Pokemon cards. You could invest it. Great. The amount of money you have, though, is at this point, that scale, that level of cash you have isn't ever really going to be an investment. As much as people say that on all the grind set channels, if you have $1,000 and you put it in the stock market, you're not going to end up with $2,000 next month unless like you're very lucky and it's happenstance. The reality is you're probably going to end up with $1,010, $1,020. And that's not really doing a lot for you. That level of cash that's able to produce from it, it changes when you hit billions. But also, it's more than that. $1 billion with that same level of returns brings real money back. But then you have the second problem, which is that level of money changes how much things are worth. If I sell $1,000 of Apple stock tomorrow, no one cares. It literally, like, no one gives a fuck ever. It doesn't matter. But if someone sold $1 billion of Apple stock tomorrow, technically, I'm not even sure they could. And it also wouldn't sell at whatever price it's at. It would sell slowly over time. It would fundamentally change what it means to even have Apple stock and what the value is. The same action, different regimes, different implications, different interactions, that changes all of it. That kind of thing would, by the way, would also change how much a dollar is worth. Like, that's how the scale of change that ends up falling back on and folding into, like, this is the whole point for them. That's the whole point of them, is the way that technical versus like, desiring machines, it's not that it's a versus, it's not that they're different in kind, it's differences of degree, right? Does a technical machine produce only when acted upon? No. Well, I mean, yes. God. You have to be able to reconsider what acted upon means, because you were looking at the art, you were acting upon it. The art existed in only the configuration of you and what you were seeing and your interaction with it. That's why all art is interactive fundamentally. We have a misunderstanding of it because we tend to think of ourselves as having an individualized internal psyche, that we're the vehicle for connecting to a piece of art, and that we look at it, but it's our own personal experience that I have individually. That is not how it works. You see it, you are part and parcel of the work of art as much as anything else. It's very, very complicated. So the scale of change is influenced by the social, it's influenced by a lot of shit. It's influenced by a lot of shit. It's part of the group phantasm. Yes, again, the identity, what a thing is. When identity shows up, identity is social. It's a social investment first. That's the way that works. Yeah, it's a lot. And we'll be able to get to it next week with any luck, because the next week is a second difference in regime follows from this. So they're going to be going through the differences in regime to, again, build out the ontology of the setup, where we talk about, hey, look, these are regimes. We talk about them differently. They're not saying that there's no such thing as technical machines. In fact, they're being incredibly particular. And just to sort of drive home the thing, there are not two kinds of object here, right? We're not talking about differences in nature. We're talking about differences in regime. Technical machines versus desiring machines isn't taxonomic of two species. Actually, it's probably similar in the sense that ultimately underneath it, species are of the same phylum, of the same stuff, ultimately. Again, it's going to be a very specific question. But we're talking about the mechanism of a thing that's occurring in two degrees of regime. So the same machine, let's talk about, it's an organ, or it's a violin. Let's say a violin. A violin can run in the technical regime, right? It can also be in the design machine. That's fine. That's there. You can look at it from both regimes. That is fine. No one gives a shit. Reading them as two classes of things is the error. And that is the thing that people do. The violin, when it's productive and usable, is a techno machine when it can be played. And here we have a burned violin. It's not useful anymore, but it's clearly useful. It's clearly useful, right? So, because it's art. Well, I mean, it's burned. It's no longer a violin, so it's not a technical machine anymore. Well, it is if it's art. Well, why is it art? Well, it's art because, and that's the point for them. The machine is, as they've talked about it, and their bare definition that they have from early on. First section, I think 3-4 paragraphs in. It is a system of fluxions. It is cuts of flows. Anything that interrupts a flow emitted by another machine is a machine. So the breast is the example they use that emits a milk flow, but the mouth cuts it. So machine is a functional operational category. It's not mechanical industrial fundamentally. That's why the technical machine versus desiring machine is a difference of regime, not composition. And the reading today, and they've got a lot more. This is not the only difference in regime, so don't worry about it. There's going to be more. We'll get to it. I'll get to it, Cosmic. Don't worry. The way that today we talked about it, the technical machine as it operates works only on condition of not being broken down. A violin only works when it has strings and isn't on fire. Really, as a thing. Its limit is where, right? You sure? Where? It rests on a distinction between means of production and product. And that's why they bring up Marx. It transmits to the product only the value it loses while wearing away. This is constant capital, value transfer, all of that. So technical machine, as it's working, confers on the product its value. And it exists as a clean separation, producing from product. This is a conservative economy as a thing, but that's that. Desire machines are very, very different. They work only when they break down, which seems really weird. Producing is grafted onto the product. So the means and the product never hold separation. Parts are consumed as it does all of these things. Breakdown itself is a function, not malfunction. It's the opposite direction, the opposite drive again from identity. Where are you doing things? Are you going from identity that captures the desire machine underneath it and then runs that identity into the fantasy, which would be product from production? These things follow. We'll be going through it, but these things follow very quickly. Or is it the opposite, where you go, oh, it's actually in service of desiring production, not enslaving it? When a violin is played, and violin can be beautiful, stunning, but it is a production of a thing. And it's being used, and it's producing X, Y, and Z. And it's only able to produce economically in that sense. And then here, it's broken. It's broken, it's burned. It's still a violin, but it's not a violin as a technical machine. And somehow it only works when it's broken. Somehow it is the status of that. It is an anti-production in a separate apparatus. That's probably how I'd phrase it for now. But next week we go through the second, because it's like the whole thing is the second difference is coming up. And I kind of already said this basically, but desiring machines produce their own anti-production, but again, not as result. It's internal. They carry their breakdown. They carry their stasis within themselves. Social technical machines, it's completely different apparatus, and fundamentally that falls back on production as an exterior, not within itself. And that's a really important distinction again. But we'll get to that next week. That'll be fine. I do want to get to Cosmic's question. How does the three synthesis then fit into the schizo and fascist pull of desire? Okay. Desire as it's going through the three syntheses, and they talk about sort of the process of desiring production unto itself when it's not been fucked with. Connection, breakdown, cut, or disconnection. With that, a little bit slices off. Bachelor machine moves on to miraculating. And at large, these things then produce a glorious subject. The challenge is this shit doesn't happen in a vacuum. Otherwise, this would just be the thing that's happening. The social machine falls back on. These things collapse onto desiring production. And within desiring production, paralogisms arrive. And paralogisms are, and all chapter 2 is all of this, mean that it's not functioning. And we actually run into some very, very particular cases, such as, I went over these on stream the other day, the identification of the afterward, the thing that happened with the action, I use video games for this because I think it's the easiest, but if I'm playing Monopoly Go, which is horrifying as a game, I press the screen. There's only one thing you can do on this game. You tap the screen. When I tap, a dice rolls, and then I move, a character moves, and then this, and I go, oh my God, I need to get a bunch of money. I'm like, I got a bunch of money. That's an afterword. I didn't get a bunch of money. I didn't get shit. I didn't do a fucking thing. I watched it happen, but I identified it as myself. The afterword is a paralogism. It's actually the process of desiring production being fucked with at large. And that's the deal here. That's the deal fundamentally, is desiring production produces as it does contingently within the social strata, like within the time and space it exists within. Does that make sense? Cosmic. Design machines need BWO for production. It's clear to me. No. They don't need it for production. That's a little teleological. Desiring machines just connect and disconnect. In any grouping of them or any location, any locality, a thing emerges. It emerges where it is. That's the BWO isn't something they need. It's something at large that emerges within them, and they see it and they begin using it because it is, the social machine of it that I think marries best is video game metas or sports metas. When people are like, oh no, the meta in Deadlock this week is these two heroes, they're the ones who win, or this is how it's played. There's no rules in any video game that's multiplayer that says, here are the characters you do in these different roles. It doesn't really happen that way. But we find one thing is more efficient than the others, causes more wins at large, and then that's what the game is meant to be played like. And this is the meta, but it emerges only after a fuck ton of playing. The first game of Dota that ever existed, people didn't even really know what they were supposed to be doing. Like now we do. Now it's here's you stay in lanes, you do these things. That break is the thing. There's an emergence within things of how things work. And we start touching into that. And design and production is no different. It's investing in the same things. It's the grooves of the record that desire is able to find itself comfortable in, continue, and then continue to write within and over. And you get in, that's habits. I mean, there's the difference of repetition, finding plane of consistency. This is kind of the middle ground of those. But that's going to be it for me. I'm frying, Jesus. And I think Heather has brought home some Costco chicken, which is fantastic. I'm excited for it. We'll see. But for those of you on YouTube, I'm going to send you over to what I'll be watching, which is Surf's going over Glenn Greenwald on Surrounded, which was a hilarious nightmare. So I'm going to go into my Costco chicken, and everyone else, I'll see you next week. I'm really promise I'm going to try to get to doing an open house this week for Anti-Oedipus. Probably tomorrow noonish, actually, right around this time. If there's no reading, I'll probably just be hanging out and stream, might play some video games and doing that. So it'll be right around. I'm really going to get to do it this week because I've had people asking questions and I need to do it. Try to do it tomorrow. Thursday is Klasowski. I've got a bunch of other stuff. And please go watch. If you haven't watched it, watch my Stoic video. I'm really happy with it. And it's really good. Really good. So we'll see you all soon enough.